There's one more source on Nashim Chashuvot that and the important woman that I want to look at with you, and then I want to kind of like summarize this part before we move on to talk about Magid at the Seder, and I think I want to talk about also kind of what I think there are broader implications to what we're reading, I think, in terms of women and halacha in general. Okay, now this is Rabbeinu Manoach of 13th century Provence. V'im Isha Chashuva, and if she's an important woman, klomar she'ein la baal. So he's going to give a few different explanations. First explanation for important woman: she doesn't have a husband. Hi gveret habayit. She runs the house herself. Tzricha seba. In that case, she would need to recline. So one possibility is that the Isha Chashuva, it said that a woman with her husband, right in the Talmud, it said a woman etzel ba'ala doesn't need to recline. So then a woman who does need to recline, that important woman must by definition be a woman without a husband. That is interesting. And historically, we know there were a lot of women who, in particular in widowhood, became kind of pronounced in their importance in the community. Inami, alternatively, shehi chashuva bifnei Hashem. Alternatively, this isn't a social definition of someone's importance. She's important in the eyes of God. Why? Yireit Hashem, because she fears heaven. Bat Gedolei Adur, she could be the daughter of great scholars of her time. Kolelet Shivchei Eshet Chayo. She is someone who would merit the type of praise that you give to the woman of valor. V'zot ha'isha. Im nimnam tziuta. And this woman, he's doing a play on words with Eshet Chayil, right? We begin Eshet Chayil with Eshet Chayil miyimsa, a woman of valor you can find. So he's saying, even if this woman might sometimes be hard to find, well, when you find her, whether or not she's got a husband, she'd better recline. Inami, alternatively, Yesh lefaresh, we can explain it like this. Maybe the Talmud was trying to be very realistic and help women get the Seder on the table. How would it be fair to expect a woman to recline when she's going to be up every 2 seconds and helping around? The hanato, because of the preparations of the food and being still preoccupied with it. Petrua meseba, that's why they exempted her from that. So we assume that women are also exempt from positive time-bound commandments because women are busy. Aval, but an Isha Chashuva, sheyesh la avadim u'shvachot, hatordim b'inyanei ha'machal. But an important woman here, he thinks important means wealthy, who's got other people looking out for her. He yoshev b'katedra, and she can basically sit while other people are taking care of things. She must recline. So Rabbeinu Manoach is giving us 3 different potential explanations of what an Isha Chashuva is. The first explanation, a woman who's the head of her own household. There's no husband there to affect her comportment. Second explanation, or let's jump to the third, right? The third explanation was a wealthy woman. She's a wealthy woman, so there's no practical constraint on her being able to fully recline and take part of the meal at leisure with everyone else. The second explanation is the one that I confess grabs me the most. She's significant in the eyes of God. She is spiritually an important person. And her spiritual importance is such that it's a given that she must recline at the Seder. What I think is particularly important about these words, aside from just the idea that even in Talmudic times, there's a recognition, even in Talmudic times, that not all women are in the same boat. On the one hand, there's a recognition that in those times there are women who are in a subservient position, perhaps, depending on how we read this passage, maybe financially, maybe in terms of how the marriage works. And on the other hand, there's a recognition, even in Talmudic times, that not all women are subservient, or not all women are in difficult financial straits, or not all women lack their own rich spiritual lives. That's there too already then. I think it's particularly important now because sometimes there's a question often about how we relate to halachot, taking into account this changing status of women And in our world, where there's so many more opportunities available to women in every field, in every way, and thank God there's so many things that can help us so that housework doesn't just fall on a woman. Men are more involved in that as well, but also we have our machines. Yeah, you don't need me to tell you all this. But the question is, how does halacha react to that? So sometimes the responsibility sometimes is things are so changed that at this point women are a completely different category that Chazal knew nothing about. Chazal could never envision women being in a category where they're spiritually on a par with men, or where they're have their own unique importance. And that's not really true in other contexts as well, but here I think it comes out very strongly that's not the case. It's very clear from this passage that there's a concept in Chazal already that perhaps it was a minority of women of their time, but there's a concept of the Isha Chashuva. There's an idea that regardless of the situation that many women might find themselves in, there are women who have already at that time an important status. Now, the other interesting thing is it can affect a halacha. And the question is, and this is what's tricky, what halachas would it affect and what halachas would it not affect? Given that they know what the category is, the fact that they don't apply it so widely in other cases suggests to us that women's exemptions from other mitzvot is not necessarily, people want to say sometimes it's purely sociological. I think this example of Haseba makes that a lot harder to say. I think it's hard to say it's purely sociological when we see that there's a case where halacha is tied, perhaps, in some level to sociology. We see that, in fact, here the Chazal are recognizing that there are other categories of women, and were other things, other exemptions sociological, we would expect to see a discussion of the Isha Chashuva keeping mitzvot shezman grama or something like that, and we don't see it. So I think this is a really important set of texts for understanding the Chazal recognize that sociological reality can shift, and that women's inherent spiritual potential, or even potential to fulfill mitzvot, is much broader than just a sociological factor, and that there's more going on than that. There's a lot more to our traditions than just sociological claims. So I think that's very important. I also think that it's really meaningful. I can say for myself, it's very meaningful I do lean at the Seder. And it's very meaningful for me personally to lean at the Seder, because when I do, I have Rabbeinu Manoach in mind. I feel blessed, like Rav Moshe Feinstein said, I feel blessed that I'm in a marriage where I do feel that both my husband and I recognize our mutual importance to each other. But then there's this added factor of, well, I'm an Isha Chashuva, Bezrat Hashem, or at least I'm striving to be an Isha Chashuva spiritually as well in my relationship to God. And one of the ways I'm reflecting that is by fully embracing the choreography of freedom.